being from Ann Arbor.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the April 22nd work session of the Ann Arbor City Council, where we will be hearing about all the good things in store for us from the Downtown Development Authority and the fiscal year 2021 budget and the Ann Arbor Housing Commission. My apologies to everyone for being late. I believe we have the DDA up first. Ms. Pillay, the floor is yours. Thank you.
I'm inviting my colleague Joe Morehouse, our Deputy Director, to join me. And we're going to begin. Need to figure out the technology. There we go. Only took me one click. So we're going to talk briefly about the DDA projects this fiscal year. We're going to provide a brief overview of DDA projects in 20 and 21 as a way of describing what is behind the proposed 20 and 21 budgets. So beginning this fiscal year, the DDA and the city collaborated to address long-standing infrastructure and pedestrian safety issues in the Carytown area, and this is between Kingsley and Catherine. The DDA's portion of the project focused on repairing the historic brick streets and making improvements to the pedestrian areas. Of particular importance were the improvements on North Fifth Avenue to make the pedestrian crossings safer. Also notable were the DDA's investments in the farmers market. We resurfaced both of the parking lots. We're actually underway with the second of them. We made improvements to the lighting. We also added a new plaza to the east end of the farmers market. We saw it in use already by Kindlefest in December, and we also saw it in use earlier this month with Full Moon. The DDA also worked to add new loading zones on Kingsley on 4th to help our small businesses in that neighborhood with their loading. And throughout the 5th and Detroit project, the DDA staff were in daily contact with the Carytown businesses with the goal of minimizing any of the negative impacts of construction. And as an outcome to this collaboration with the business community, the DDA and the businesses worked together to design new streetlight banners which celebrate the neighborhood. Speaking of Full Moon, other special events, the DDA has continued its support for downtown events, in particular for Art Fair. The DDA has continued its holiday lights, which are in the trees from November through March. Those are those twinkle lights through all 4 commercial districts. And the DDA continued its funding for anti-graffiti efforts, and this includes providing free paint and cleaning materials to small businesses who may be tagged by graffitiists so that they can remove it on our dime to help address that graffiti problem. DDA continues its support for affordable housing. In 1997, the DDA created its own affordable housing fund. At this point, DDA has expended almost $5 million. About half of this has been used to construct new affordable housing units, and about half have been used to safeguard existing affordable units, and that includes repairs. This fiscal year, the DDA provided a grant to the city to support its work to plan the redevelopment of the Y lot, in particular engaging our community to help it shape its vision for what that lot could look like and what it would contain. And in commitment to our importance, stressing our importance about affordable housing, the DDA has already committed $745,000 to the goal of a significant number of affordable housing units on the Y lot when we are finally moving forward. In addition, earlier this month, the DDA received a grant request from Avalon Housing and the Housing Commission. The 2 grants total about $450,000, and the DDA will be considering these grant requests next week at its board meeting. The DDA recognizes the importance of a strong city government. A few years ago, a DDA TIF cap was established by council that allows the DDA to continue its capital reinvestment in downtown, while at the same time producing additional downtown tax revenues for the city and other taxing units of government here in downtown. This net increment tax capture beyond the portion received by the DDA will continue to grow as more private development is continuing in downtown. Once again, the DDA provided its $500,000 grant to the city in support of the Court Police Building. This year saw a new grant to the city for streetlights in the Carytown neighborhood, and the DDA's commitment of parking revenues to the city is now at 20%. This year it's estimated to be $4.4 million, and that is likely to grow as parking demand remains strong and rates will be increasing, and I'll talk about that in just a moment. With the goal of making parking changes a little bit more predictable, the DDA established a multi-year schedule of parking rate changes. The fundamental piece, which is hourly parking in the garages, will remain the same. It has not changed since 2012. It remains at $1.20 an hour. It will remain the same until 2022. The majority of hourly parking downtown are in the garages. Most of us think it's at the meters. It's actually in the garages. And again, that rate will remain the same. The rate changes that the DDA is bringing forward will be 10 cents a dime an hour at the meters the next 2 fiscal years. And the monthly rate change for permits will increase $5 to $10. This fiscal year, the DDA also completed something pretty important, which was the completion of its e-park machine system. What this allows is patron benefits, such as using a credit card or the e-park app, which many people compliment because it allows you to pay for parking while you're still sitting in your car. Fiscal year 19 marks the beginning of the 20th year of the Get Downtown program, which was co-founded by the DDA as a program to support downtown businesses. And it encourages employees to use all parts of the transportation system. The Go Pass is the signature program of Get Downtown. This transit pass is sponsored by the DDA for employers to provide free to their employees. Downtown employees took more than 600,000 rides last year using this Go Pass, which is at this point approximately 9% of the total ridership on ATA. The DDA also supports 3 other mobility programs through the ATA. The DDA subsidizes transit service on routes 4 and 5, which is Packard and Washtenaw, which are the primary routes connecting Ann Arbor to Ypsilanti, which is where a lot of our downtown employees live. These routes have the greatest ridership of all of the routes for our downtown employees. The DDA is also continuing its sponsorship of Night Ride, which is a late-night shared taxi that runs curb to curb after fixed route service ends. And with the DDA subsidy, the cost to an employee is $3 a ride anywhere in the city limits of Ann Arbor and east to Ypsilanti. And also the DDA subsidizes downtown employees when they use the Chelsea or Canton Express routes. ATA and Get Downtown provided to the DDA earlier this month an estimate that approximately 1,200 employees per working day are diverted from parking in the downtown system because they're using the other technologies, the other transportations. And this not only frees up valuable parking spaces for our customers, but think about what it does for our traffic congestion downtown by having so many of our employees using a bicycle or riding a bus. This year, the DDA also continued its support for bicycles in the downtown. This included the installation of another 100 new bike parking spaces downtown, including 32 within the 4th and Washington garage, so it's covered parking. We now have over 1,000 bike parking spaces downtown. The DDA also, along with the city, contributed to Arbor Bike, and we'll talk about the bikeway on William in just a moment. Sustainability is a key strategy called out by the DDA development plan. And we're excited about some of the projects we took on this year. Notably, the DDA installed a 4-car solar carport in the 4th and Catherine lot. This was a pilot to help us understand more about the design of how carports might be designed when we look to put some on top of the rooftops of the garages. But meanwhile, the carport is generating enough electricity that's covering all the electrical use on that lot, and that includes all the EV users, all the EV chargers, as well as the lights. The DDA also committed its funds to a solar array, I don't know if many people know this, at the farmers market in 2008. So we have 2 solar arrays across the street from each other, both supported by DDA. And these are visible statements of the city and the DDA's commitment to seeing more solar electric in our community. And another initiative, just to point out, is the DDA has been building the electric vehicle charging numbers in our garages. We're now up to 29, and they are laid out in places throughout the system. We also put adjacent parking spaces next to them. So if people know each other with electric vehicles, they can park side by side and then share the charging units. So it's more than 29. Infrastructure is at the heart of what the DDA is about. The DDA remains committed to sidewalk repairs in the downtown, and we work closely in cooperation with the city. The focus of the DDA is the brick section of the sidewalk, and we respond to repair requests from downtown businesses who also contact us about things like bikes. They want more bike parking. As an element of walkability, in just a few weeks, the DDA will be taking on a demolition of the canopy, which has stood in front of the old Ann Arbor Inn Hotel and now Courthouse Square Apartments. It's been standing in the right-of-way for decades, and it has been blocking the sidewalk. So the DDA is going to take on the goal of removing this deteriorated structure so we can regain the sidewalk. We have small businesses now on 4th Avenue that could use this for cafe seating. All of us who walk down the street and want to talk with each other, there's now room for us once that thing is gone. And of course, the DDA continues its commitment to keeping the parking system in good repair. The parking structures and the lots are often the first impression that our customers and our visitors have of downtown. So a well-maintained parking system conveys a great deal about the quality of the experience they're going to have here in downtown. So I'm going to shift gears. That was fiscal year 19. We're going to talk about the projects that we're looking forward to in fiscal year 20 and 21. And as mentioned, a significant focus of the DDA is infrastructure, and we undertake infrastructure commitments that directly relate to the city's goals and the DDA's mission. And we wholeheartedly support City Council's commitment to Vision Zero, which prioritizes human lives above all other considerations, including motor vehicle travel time. We're underway with a number of projects that use those as the goals. And we call these projects our People-Friendly Streets projects. We are completing 5th in Detroit. That was the first of them. We'll be taking on 1st and Ashley. We'll be taking on William Street, State Street, Huron. What they all have in common is that they were planned together to maximize their impact. All of them were also designed with a great deal of public engagement. We talked with people one-on-one, we had pop-up meetings, we had big group meetings, focus group meetings. We met with adjacent property owners, business owners, we met with the employees of those businesses, residential groups, city boards and commissions. And we continue to meet with them. Now that we're underway with Huron Street, it's the same commitment to daily contact, just as we did with 5th in Detroit. So people can share with us any concerns, any questions, we can share information. These projects in their entirety are designed with two big goals, again as stated, to improve safety and to improve the infrastructure. Huron Street has begun. The majority of it, though, will be done in fiscal year 20. The great majority of this project is infrastructure. You've seen what we've done so far, which was removing deteriorated sidewalk on the south side of the street. It will also include the installation of 100 new LED dark sky compliant streetlights. And unlike the current situation where the streetlights on Huron are often out, these new lights will be owned by the city. And our city crews do an excellent job responding to lighting outages. And a primary design element to the Huron project is to encourage trees, to the extent possible, to grow to their largest canopy. As people pass through, we want to announce through the design of the streetscape that they are in Tree City. And this includes buying the largest trees we can find and providing for them in very large planters that allow for the maximum amount of water and light. As with infrastructure, the other focus is pedestrian safety. It's an MDOT right-of-way, as we all know. And the city and DDA staff work together to frame requests to MDOT to improve conditions for pedestrians. As you know, we received a letter from MDOT that off-peak parking is not permitted, and we were disappointed. As you know, the Transportation Commission actually pushed the DDA to extend the area up to State Street because we all saw the advantage of putting a vehicle between us and the traffic. But having said that, other requested changes are still in front of MDOT. We have asked that we be allowed to replace the Hawk signal at 3rd with a full signal, and that we no longer permit turns on red. I saw it today. Somebody in a wheelchair was proceeding, and because somebody had been inching into the intersection, they were made vulnerable, and I'm grateful to say they weren't hurt. But having no turn on red prioritizes pedestrians. What we have heard from MDOT is approval of our request to install a new left turn signal at 5th Avenue. William Street. As mentioned, we are very proud of our first, and there will be many more that follow, but our first protected bikeway on street. We're going to begin construction after commencement, and much of the project involves resurfacing the road, and with the city's support, the project will also include water main consolidation. The goal of this project is to reduce the crashes on the street, and that includes vehicle, it includes bicycle, and pedestrian. Also in fiscal year 20, we will keep working on the design of the 1st and Ashley Street improvements. As with the others, a significant portion of the project are infrastructure improvements, including a great deal of street resurfacing, a great deal of sidewalk replacement. We'll be adding streetlights. There's storm water. We'll also be adding 7 blocks of new water main. And as with the goal of the project is to reduce crashes. Most significantly, we'll be working to restore two-way traffic to these historic streets, which were two-way for most of their existence. But we'll also be adding other pedestrian elements, such as bump outs and leading pedestrian intervals. There is also on First Street, as a piece of this project, the second on-street bikeway, a protected bikeway. It'll be on the east side of First Street. It will connect to the William Street bikeway, and as significantly, it'll connect to the tree line. It will include a section, in fact, of what will be on street for the tree line. And so people who live in the Old West Side will be able to get to campus. They'll also be able to bisect downtown on their bicycle on a safe way. A project that's coming forward to council in fiscal year 20, the DDA is seeking to expand the Anna Ashley Garage, and there's several reasons behind the project. First of all, close to the garage, there's a great number of public parking spaces that are on surface parking lots. They may not be city-owned, but they're on private parking lots. Development pressure means these parking lots are likely going to be redeveloped in the coming decades. So the garage spaces are intended to absorb that parking demand that's on those private lots into the garage to allow the higher, better use of those surface lots. The existing demand in the garage is high, but the design of the garage is perhaps most notable. The garage has a double helix, and what that means is people can jump from floor 1 to floor 3 pretty quickly. So you can get to the upper floors pretty quickly. But the problem is it won't ever allow the garage to have an alternate use, like a flat floor garage like 4th and Washington might. Because as the futurists talk about parking demand, many are saying parking demand may be reducing. Among the opportunities then would be to use some of the parking garage for things like office on the upper floors. Ann Ashley can't have that use because its design is so efficient for parking, it's all sloped. The other part about the garage is like Liberty Square, it was designed to be expanded. The footings and the foundations were built to add up to 3 new floors. And as we all know, adding parking to an existing garage is a better use of downtown land than taking up more land for another garage. Plus, we've already sunk the cost into the footings and the foundation, so adding spaces are going to be much less expensive in this garage. We'll be coming to council probably in June or July. The garage site plan will include not only the added spaces, we are looking to add an elevator on the southwest corner, improving the pedestrian entrance off of Miller. We'll add another water main as a piece of this. We're also looking to take a 1987 garage and try to add some sustainability elements, and that includes taking out all the lighting that's there today and replace it with LED lights that are on dimmers, so when no one's walking to their car, the lights can go dim, and when someone's walking to the car, the lights go up. We're looking to add a significant amount of electricity to the garage for at least 20 EVs, with the idea that more and more cars are going to be using electric as we go forward. And most significantly, the new rooftop will be engineered for that future solar energy carports installation that I've been talking about. We think probably about 2/3 of that garage may be available to us to add solar. So it's a significant amount of electricity. The project costs are estimated to be $22 million. We'll know when we go out to bid whether or not the steel tariffs have anything to do with that number. When a project bond comes before council, the DDA reimburses the city for all of its issuance costs, and in addition to which the DDA pays the 3% overhead charge, so there's an additional $500,000 that the DDA would pay as part of the project. Infrastructure continues into the next couple years. The DDA is committed to investing another $150,000 each of the next 2 years in more streetlights. They're looking to invest more right-of-way repairs, $400,000 each of the next 2 years. We're going to continue with our parking structure repairs. New this year, we're working with the city to replace the sidewalk litter cans. We're setting aside money for alley improvements that may be called out by the solid waste study. And we're also beginning dialogue with the State Street neighborhood about improvements that may take place in State Street, including potentially another protected bikeway that would connect to William Street. The DDA intends to commit its funding, continue its funding with Get Downtown and the Go Pass. It will continue its funding to affordable housing and events. The DDA is committed to continuing its funding also to the city. And as we look at rate changes in the next couple of years, the amount going to the city from the parking system is anticipated to grow. As with all the projects this year, all those projects in 20 and 21 will continue to be planned in close collaboration and cooperation with city staff so that we maximize the benefit to the public from these projects. And so having described the projects, my colleague Joe is going to talk about this year's budget, or 20 and 21 budget.
All right, to begin, the DDA has two primary funds, TIF and parking, and two related funds, housing and parking maintenance. Going over the income categories, charges for services, which are the DDA's parking revenues. FY19 was slightly lower than FY18 due to the expiration of two private parking lot leases. FY20 and 21 projected amounts show increases due to the previously approved rate increases, which will be escalated by 10 cents per hour per year on the on-street meters and $5 and $10 per month permit increases for FY20 and 21 respectively. Investment income projections reflect that the anticipated decrease from FY18 in fund balances due to spending on DDA capital projects and unknown future rate increases. Miscellaneous revenues were unexpectedly high in FY18 due to two unanticipated items: return of a grant from the farmers market and return of the escrow for the First and Washington parking garage. Operating transfers in, which are the transfers from the TIF fund to the housing fund and the parking fund to the parking maintenance fund. These transfers declined in FY19 as the DDA funded major capital improvements. The FY20 and 21 amounts are projected to increase to ensure stable funding for the maintenance of the parking facilities. The housing fund transfers are projected to comply with the city's DDA ordinance. Use of prior year's surplus relates to the fact that the DDA is an agency whose mission is to engage in large capital projects. The uses of the surpluses decline after FY19 as the DDA funds three major capital improvements in that year. Those improvements are the Huron, Ashley First, and William Street improvements, 5th and Detroit, along with the Ann and Ashley parking expansion. In FY20 and 21, the DDA continues to fund the Ashley First Street improvements and the Ann and Ashley parking expansion, which are multi-year. Sale of bonds. In FY19, the DDA sold a bond to fund three major street improvements: Ashley, Huron, First and William, and these funds will be spent over 3 years. Taxes. The DDA tax increases at the 3.5% capped rate. Going to the expense categories on the next page. Personnel services. In FY18, the DDA was not at full FTEs for the entire year, which explains the increase in FY19. FY20 shows the transition overlap of the deputy director position along with the severance pay and the possible transition overlap and severance pay of another senior position. FY21 also shows the possible transition overlap and severance pay for the other senior position. Payroll fringes, the costs remain constant. Other services, which are professional services, parking system operating expenses, general maintenance expenses. The increases are due to the professional services on the future State Street project and the People-Friendly Streets projects, along with an increase in maintenance costs for the streetlight replacements in the district. Materials and supplies, which are office supplies, the costs remain constant. Other charges, which are grants and credit card processing fees, also remain constant. Pass-throughs, which are bond payments and operating transfers, increased due to the increased bond payments for the new bond issued in FY19 and one anticipated to be issued in FY20. This increase reflects increased transfers to the parking maintenance fund to make sure that there is adequate funding for the parking facility repairs. Capital outlays double in FY19 due to the DDA payments for the three major capital projects. Those improvements, again, are Huron, Ashley First, and William Street improvements, 5th and Detroit, along with the Ann and Ashley parking expansion. FY20 and 21 decline, but remain constant as DDA takes on smaller projects like the State Street project and alley improvements in the district. And finally, employee allowances remain constant. Turn it back to Susan.
So as noted, just a couple notes about the budget. The expansion project in Ann Ashley includes $775,000 for needed repairs. So if the expansion doesn't go forward, we'll go forward with those repairs. And as Joe noted, there is no change in FTEs. We're going to remain constant. There are funds in there for Joe's succession, so we can have time for him to train his successor. And there's additional funds for another senior position in case there's another retirement. And I'm going to land on this page, and we're going to turn it over for questions, just to emphasize that in the 20 and 21 budgets, the DDA is committed and remains committed to meeting its mission through downtown investments that reach many goals. The first is to make downtown safer for all users, and that includes pedestrians, bicyclists, individuals with disabilities, and motor vehicle drivers. We are committed to improving downtown infrastructure. This includes installing new water mains, repaving roads, repairing sidewalks, and improving the parking system. We remain committed to affordable housing. We know we need to safeguard the diversity of our downtown and our community, as this is our strength. We remain committed to our sustainability goals, which means the DDA will continue to work toward better stormwater management downtown, encouraging more solar electric and more dark sky compliant LED streetlights. We will continue to remain committed to all mobility modes, and this includes mass transit, bicycling, and car share, and hopefully eventually mass transit connecting our community to places far away like Detroit. And of course, the DDA remains committed to supporting our city to ensure a strong city for our whole community. So with that, we can turn it over to questions.
Councilor Ackerman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Susan and Joe. Joe, are you retiring?
Yes, I am.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you.
Having served on the audit committee for a couple of years, I can thank you very personally for your work. Your integrity and your knowledge of the community has been incredibly valuable. So, just a few questions, if I could. I see the 54 trees planted. It seems as though, and I can only speak anecdotally, that our downtown street trees don't seem to have the same lifespan that are those out in the neighborhood. I bet their lives are a little bit harder, especially as new plantings. What have we learned along the way to try to get them from sapling to mature tree?
Well, we've learned a few things. The first is it is an incredibly harsh environment downtown. And those 3-foot by 3-foot tree pits is not enough space for a tree to get air and water. So the first thing we're learning is oversizing the tree planters to allow the tree more shots at having rainwater and so forth. The second, probably equally important thing we've learned is we need partners to keep them watered. Every tree that the DDA plants, we have a multi-year commitment to keeping it watered during its warranty period to get it established. But once it's established, we rely on the help of many of our downtown property owners, the downtown biz, which is in the Main Street area, and others to help us keep these trees watered. And one of the reasons for the design of the planters is often to encourage annuals, and with annuals come more watering, because you can see them wilting. So with the help of property owners, with the help of the biz, more of these trees are getting watered and therefore able to get through those particularly tough points in the middle of the summer when there's drought.
Okay. Well, thank you. The 54 trees a year is not a small financial investment and makes our downtown more beautiful. So glad to hear we're learning along the way. The only other question I wanted to address tonight was noticing about $8 million a year in other charges, those being credit card fees. That's an alarming amount to be paying to Visa. What, if anything, can we do to try to reduce those fees and capture more of that revenue?
Slightly more than a year ago, we bid it out, and we have the lowest rate we can get.
Okay.
It's that 70% of our transactions are going through credit cards right now. We also have the mobile app, which has a charge to it. And we just installed completed the ePark system, which increased the number of machines that can take a credit card. So we're offering it. It's being used.
Yeah.
But on the other side is, it does save us in not having to collect the coin, count the coin, process the coin. So in many ways, it saves us in other areas.
Do you know what the net is?
No,
Okay,
it would be hard to.
fair enough. Is there a difference in the fee structure between the app and the credit card in the machine?
The app has an additional charge for the creator of the app,
Got
the
it, okay.
company that maintains that. But the credit card fees, and then there's communication fees for the equipment to take it to the clearinghouse electronically. And then there's, in credit cards, there's two charges. There's one is the credit card processing fee. There's another clearinghouse that has to take it and process it.
Thank you. And actually, I'm sorry, if I could ask one more. Courthouse Square, Wickfield bought it a few years ago. Do we know what the future of those 116 units are?
I do not, but perhaps the second portion of tonight's evening might include that very question.
Fair enough. Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Amlawi.
Thank you, Mayor Taylor, and thank you for presenting us with some information here tonight. I have, as you know, probably a lot of questions. I guess one of my biggest concerns right now is with all these big projects that are scheduled in the next few years, getting them completed in the time frame that we're hoping them to be finished under. We've had a lot of recent delays on projects, and look at this, and it has a lot going on in a 3 or 4 year, stretch, and it's a big concern of mine. And I'll leave it at that, and you can respond to it later, perhaps. I want to get through a few other questions. Being frugal here, I heard you mention along the Huron improvements that we're going to be going with bigger trees. What is the difference in price for us to buy a bigger tree rather than have the patience and waiting for it to grow? It just seems when we're fighting for pennies, a place that we can save some money.
I don't have the differential off the top of my head, but I'd be happy to explore it. The reason for the extra payment for the large trees in this location as opposed to traditional streetscape is this is a civic corridor. And the goal of this project is to get to a canopy that is equivalent potentially to what we see on Main Street. So to get to that, given how slow-growing trees are downtown, the hope was by making the additional purchase, we'd be able to get there faster. There are trees on Main Street, for instance, that are oaks that were installed before I got here, and I've been here 23 years, and they look like saplings. And that's one of the primary reasons to buying a very large tree and trying to do everything we can to nurture it on Huron is so that we don't wait 25 years to get a tree to a significant size on this particular street. This is a street, as I said, it's a civic corridor where we announce our pride in our community.
I appreciate that, but I'm still highly concerned. Seems like streetscape projects only last 20 years, 25 years before they're torn up, as the case on South U. There's disease, there's all sorts of things that, what kind of warranty do we get with that kind of tree, and what's the price difference? And it just seems as a luxury item.
Okay.
Another thing is the solar installations. You had described that this one at the corner is the second. There's probably other ones I'm missing, but the surface parking lot is the second.
Yeah, the first is at the Farmers Market lot, and this is the second at Catherine and Fourth.
Could you help me explain why there was such a gap in time between those two, if it is one of our priorities, and what we could do to help make sure there's not 10-year increments between installations?
So we heard from City Council about a year or so ago through the budget process, strong encouragement that we get serious about adding more solar. And this project had already been under plan, and we doubled down to get it done. And I think the answer is in part, we all share that same gap. And I think what we're learning is that if we want to make it happen, we have to make it happen. And so, as I said, the Ann and Ashley project includes the anchors for what will be a very significant array on top of that rooftop. So the gap won't be several years. It'll be a very short duration after the Ann and Ashley project begins to move forward.
Do we have backup plans just in case that isn't approved
For the
for
the
additional
rooftops?
installations?
At this point, we don't, but we have studied the rooftops. We have a better understanding than we did about where the sunshine can shine in a way that can generate the electricity. We have a better understanding of the weight bearing of these garages. The toughest challenge is that to keep parking on the rooftop, you got to build these carports, and the wind up there is very different than it is on the ground. And not all the garages have the kind of strength apparent, so we have to do more engineering. Ann and Ashley has been engineered, so it's easier to move forward. We would have to we'd have to engineer what these might look like on the other garages, which is to say, it doesn't have to take a long time, but we'd have to do that work.
Yeah, I would strongly suggest that. I mean, that's a very hypothetical situation, since that project haven't even been approved, that we should be looking at multiple sites, in my opinion, not just one that still hasn't been approved. Lastly, I'm sorry to be as critical and harsh, but this is kind of what my job is up here. I am somewhat disappointed in the fact that 415 West Washington is not anywhere on the radar for the DDA. It does fall within the boundaries, and you know, it's a blighted site. The tools that the DDA has can address the situation we have over there, and quite frankly, I think this is what a DDA is created to do. So I'm throwing that out here, that I'd like to see talk about 415 West Washington. I just, don't see anything currently, and it does fall within the DDA boundaries, and they have a lot of tools that can help take care of the situation.
And I thank you for that. You raised this at the DDA City Partnerships Committee last month, and we have on tap at the May Partnerships meeting an in-depth discussion of the project. What the DDA members asked was to understand more about the goals of the demolition. What had been proposed, for instance, an urban farm may or may not meet, it may or may not be providing benefit to downtown. And so to understand what the use of the site may be, to understand how this fits with the planning for the tree line, and perhaps as importantly, to understand what the city's goals are for affordable housing potentially on the site. The DDA members asked to take a step back and understand how this newly cleared site will be put to use, so they could understand the investment. We don't know yet what the demolition cost will be, so they've asked to take some time with yourself and Councilmember Lum at the partnerships meeting to learn more about council's goals for the site once the site is cleared, because they don't really know what it is that city is looking to do on that site, other than to remove the blighted building.
Appreciate your interest and your willingness to work on that. I know I said I was done talking, but I got one last one. We talked about rate increases for metered parking.
Yeah.
The motive behind that in prior discussions was to help encourage turnover, to help the downtown merchants and businesses. I've asked it before, and I'll continue to ask it, is, are we going to be putting this additional revenue into programs to help small business owners in downtown? Or are we just doing something different with it? And just, if that's our motive, then perhaps we should be taking that money and putting it into programs that help those businesses that we're trying to target.
So, valid point. I could have added to this presentation more of the details around the Get Downtown and Go Pass program, the additional support for transit between IPSI. The DDA is spending upwards to $750,000 on transit services, on mobility, shared taxi, all the above, in support of downtown businesses. And all those funds come from the parking system. The parking system is also now being used to help provide the city with 20%, and some of the importance that we place in that is the city services for small businesses is not insignificant. So these dollars may have impact already for small businesses in where they're being applied. Certainly, 10 cents an hour sounds like a lot, but the majority of hourly parking downtown is actually inside the parking garages. Most of the hourly is inside the garages, where the rates won't be changing. So we can certainly have a dialogue, and we have already started, because it is important to support our small businesses. In this era of Amazon, they face a particularly hard struggle. And so we share with you that concern, and I think it's just a question of figuring out more strategies. For instance, the DDA used to have a sustainability program that was an energy audit that was free of charge to downtown businesses, to which they also added dollars to help them make some energy-saving changes. And that was certainly something we could resurrect in support of downtown businesses. It was a program that was very popular.
Councilor Merlot.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Ms. Polly, and Mr. Morehouse. Congratulations, and thank you for your many years of excellent service and fiscal stewardship and acumen. So thank you, and all the best to you. Now, Ms. Polly, and thank you both for being here tonight. I do have a few questions, but before the questions, just a request. And this is sort of a follow-on to Councilmember Ackerman's question about other charges, which you expanded upon, so we know what is in that bucket. So the budget data presented is a direct lift from the budget book, and I'm not faulting you guys at all, because you're using the same standard accounting expense classifications that the city uses, things like other charges, other services, pass-throughs, et cetera. And that is informative, but to really understand the DDA spending, I think it would be really useful and informative to display the budget spending requests by activity or program. And again, verbally, you expanded on, some of these accounting expense classifications again. But in addition to the standard, accounting classifications. So, so for example, to lay out the 36 million in, like personnel costs, parking, operations and by program, like affordable housing, Go Pass, the bikes programs, and by project. I don't know if you have a budget breakdown like that you could share, or if not, if you could develop something like that, if it wouldn't require too much effort.
We have a report that we could send over.
Okay, thanks. That would be really helpful. Thank you. Because I couldn't take all the notes when you were, expanding orally on what some of these things include. So thank you very much. Slide 32, there was a statement, quote, if the Ann Ashley expansion project doesn't proceed, other repairs will be paid for out of fund balance. I'm wondering if you could just elaborate on why that statement was included at all, why that was called out, and what might prevent the expansion from happening?
So we had called out earlier what the repair budgets were for the next 2 years.
Right.
And we did not indicate the 775,000 with those earlier numbers. So we felt it honest to share with you that in addition to, I think it was 2.4 million, I don't know if I can go backwards, but, and the 0.7, the 700,000, there would be an additional 775. So just to say that that's also needed. But the project budget, the $22 million project budget, includes that in it.
Okay.
And when we get to council, one of the things we intend to bring you is a project budget. For instance, there may be some who are interested to see the cost per parking space. Well, if the project includes LED lights and the repairs and so forth, it's very hard to see what the 375 to 400 parking spaces would cost. So we'll bring to you a project budget that takes that out, so you can see those elements.
Okay.
And that's where the 775 would be reflected.
Okay, thank you very much. Also related to parking, I'm wondering if you have any updated data on parking capacity utilization in total and by structure, similar to the Nelson Nygaard study from 2015, and if you do, if you could share it, and if not, wondering when we would update that 2015 data.
So we can certainly send, part of the response, we'll be sure to assemble utilization reports for all the facilities. And the study was undertaken in 15 to understand, there was a specific question behind it at that point, which was we were seeing a lot of residential development, and we were trying to understand the offset or the parking impact because of all that development. I think undertaking another study likely will happen in the next year or so with all the new mobilities. And we've talked a lot about scooters, bike share, with the increasing use of transit, to understand more about the parking demand downtown and kind of where the whole transportation system downtown may be going. I think there's still enough pieces that are in flux, but within about a year or so, I anticipate that the DDA will want to undertake that update.
Thanks. Thanks, that's good to hear, because I do think that the, utilization data obviously would be, pretty essential in assessing the parking situation downtown. So,
Yeah, an interesting fact this is a factoid from the 2015 study. It was interesting, they did a 2:30 in the morning walk around. And what they saw was almost no impact from all the residents that had moved in downtown. There were far less parking than we thought. We thought we might be seeing all the garages filled up. The residents were living without a car, or they were finding some other way to get around, but those residential projects were not impacting the system, at least at 2:30 in the morning. We were not seeing a lot of cars. So that was an important end result of that analysis.
okay. Which segues to my last question. So the DDA, controls quite a lot of discretionary money, millions, in fact, beyond the cost to operate the parking system. And, I understand the DDA has, a board, obviously, that approves budgets and makes spending decisions, and obviously that's appropriate. But I'm interested in what the DDA does to, and Councilmember Ramlawi's question, as, one of your constituents, businesses, I am interested in understand what the DDA does to actively engage businesses and residents in setting, establishing budget spending priorities, and, for projects and programs, not, beyond the obligatory, public hearings and, notification meetings on projects. I'd be interested in having a better understanding of how the DDA actively solicits input from downtown businesses and residents, business associations. How you go about getting that data, that information, that feedback, and how frequently do you do it?
So we are in pretty regular, if not daily, contact with constituents in the downtown. What I'm hearing is a request to bring the budgets to these community members and ask for their involvement.
Excellent.
We don't have that set up yet, but that's a really important idea, and I know it's something that our administrator has shared with us as a city to find more ways to engage the community with budgeting. So I don't have a specific answer now, other than to say that's an excellent idea, and we will work to find a way to weave it in the future.
Okay, excellent, thanks.
Yeah.
I'll probably send in a few more. Thank you.
Thank you. One more perhaps, and then I have Councilor Bannister and Eaton. You want to? Councilor Bannister,
Okay.
after you, we'll move to Housing Commission.
Okay,
Hello.
I just wanted to mirror what Ali said about 415 West Washington.
Okay.
And also what Councilmember Lum said about more detail on those numbers. I didn't get it all. On slide 4, about farmer's market, I think there's a guy named Mr. Lynn. He's a local pastor, and he also does planning. He's the farmer's market planning person. And he wanted, I'm seeing it's probably not ringing any bells for you, and the improvements to farmer's market that they wanted in the market itself, beyond what you all have already accomplished.
Was he able to share with you what those would look like, so I could bring this back and meet with the market manager, or?
I believe, Mr. Lazarus, does this ring any bells with you about that? We did explore this in detail, but it's been a couple months.
I know that we had a project to expand and improve farmers market that the bids came in much higher than the budget, and rather than take money from other initiatives, we postponed some of those improvements. But without knowing specifically what Mr. Lynn was asking about, I don't really want to speculate. If we can catch up separately and you can give those to me,
Yep.
I'll provide the answers.
That'd be great.
Okay, we'll follow up on those. On slide 8, we talked about $150,000 in new street lights for the Carytown area. Are those in compliance with the dark sky friendly?
Absolutely.
Okay.
They meet all the standards that the city has given itself, absolutely.
Okay, so they
Yep.
seemed awfully bright.
Yeah, and what was great about these lights was the city and DDA worked and asked for community members to give us input on the design. You may have seen it near Zingerman's. We had signage on the lights saying, give us your feedback about, because there was a shield involved to help keep the light from casting upward. But yes, they are dark sky compliant,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay, that sounds good. On slides 19 through 22, we've got all these traffic crash and vehicle pedestrian crash reductions and all. What study are you using, or references on those statistics for pedestrian safety? Where did those come from?
So our consultants, Tool Design, worked with Smith Group, and they pulled data from around the country over the last many years. There have been studies of all these different changes and analyzing what the impacts were, and so they've assembled them, and those are the statistics that we've now received. So the benefit of a bump out, or the benefit of two-way traffic, for instance, have come from other communities where they've implemented those changes, and then they've counted crashes afterwards to see what the impact was.
Okay,
So these are nationally drawn statistics from other communities.
okay. And briefly, on slide 25, alley improvements.
Yep.
I had talked with several downtown business owners, and they are very concerned about their trash pickup.
Absolutely.
Want it 7 days a week, and are willing to pay a special assessment and all. So I was wondering what your alley improvements were there on page 25.
So what that speaks to is the capital that may go into making things like that happen. Among the goals we have as a community is more compostable collection downtown. There may need to be some modification to alleys. The real estate is pretty tight in a lot of them. So we're just setting aside dollars to understand what the study may generate and where we can make improvements to make solid waste pickup easier for our city crews and for all the other crews.
Okay. My very last question, thank you very much, is on page 26, slide 26, where I want to thank you for letting the Earth Day
Sure.
have our celebrations on Sunday and today. And there's some talk about just bagging those meters permanently on that floor, on that center of the city, so that we could entertain pop-up events and get people sitting and using that area more so. So that's a question or a comment, if you have anything from your budget standpoint or otherwise about that option.
Well, just an observation that whenever a community member, such as today, wants to use it, the DDA has made it available. It's not for lack of effort. I mean, if someone wants to use it, we're very happy to comply. We don't know that you need to remove parking for that to happen, because having the parking there keeps it active. Those are cars, for instance, coming to the library, for instance, coming to downtown and coming to downtown businesses. So it may not be that you want to remove it all the time, but instead make it clear that DDA is making it available for special events. Whenever we've had a request, we've made it available.
Okay, thank you.
You bet.
Councilor Griswold, did you have something brief so that we can get to Housing Commission?
Yes, I do, and
Thank
I'd
you.
just like to suggest that for future work sessions, that we divide the public comment time by the number of council members, because this is the second time I've waited and lost out. I just have one question, and that is, are any of the lights positive contrast lights at the crosswalks? And if you're
So
not sure, you can.
I'm less familiar with that term, and I can certainly check. But I can tell you that they meet all the requirements that the city has for lighting. And in fact, on Huron, it's notable, large sections of Huron do not meet current lighting standards. And so we'll be bringing them up to current standards. I'll look into that terminology. I'm not aware of that term of art.
Oh, okay, yeah, it's
But they do
from the
meet all standards.
Federal Highway Administration
Federal
from
Highway?
2008, but we can talk later about it. Thanks.
All right.
Thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much. There
Thank you.
is, there's a lot going on in our downtown, a lot that the DDA is doing, and, you know, I think we're grateful for all the good work and look forward to the various improvements.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Hall and friends, the mic is yours.
How do you get the full screen of the
We're trying to figure out how to
slide?
get the full screen of the slide.
Is anyone in a position to provide technical assistance?
'Cause apparently it is not.
Ms. Pillay, were you,
I mean, I can go without
Councilmember?
doing
I
that,
think
that's
you're
not a
in
problem.
the PDF versus the PowerPoint.
Oh. That's fine, doesn't matter. Yes, Zach. Not show this, so we have a
the
full
slideshow?
screen. Yeah. Thank you. Hi, thank you. Jennifer Hall with the Ann Arbor Housing Commission. I will also be bringing up Aubrey Patino, the Director of Avalon Housing, as well as Teresa Gelati, the Director of the Office of Community and Economic Development. But I will start off by giving a background on the Ann Arbor Housing Commission. Hold on, let me make sure I can use this. I wanted to talk about the various services that we provide, just a brief overview, so I can tie that into the impact of mainly the federal government, as well as our redevelopment that we're still in the process of doing and how that impacts our budget. There's also some attachments to this presentation. There's a couple documents. One is, it looks like this, and it has demographics, all kinds of demographics about who we serve. I'll be bringing this up a little later, which is our actual budget, and going into more details on it. And I think there's a couple other documents. I don't remember off the top of my head what they are, but I'm happy to talk about any of those if you have questions. There's three major types of activities that the Housing Commission provides. The first is we actually own and operate housing. So that's what we call our affordable housing properties. At this point, you may have seen the MLive article stating that we no longer have public housing. That is a type of housing that's subsidized. It does not mean we don't have any more government-sponsored housing that we own, because we still own it. We just call it generically affordable housing. It's just financed in a different way. We have our Voucher Program, which is our largest program, and I'll go in a little more detail into that. And I'm not going to go into a lot of detail tonight, but we also have a family self-sufficiency program as well as a homeownership program. I'm happy to answer questions on that. For our affordable housing, we have a little over 400 apartments. There's a map in a minute that shows you where they're dispersed throughout the city by ward. We mostly have one-bedrooms. We have a definite shortage in two-bedrooms, and we're one of the very few organizations that provide the larger 4- and 5-bedroom apartments. When they're needed, they're very much needed, but it's not a large number of folks in the community that obviously need a 5-bedroom apartment. As the states, all of them have rent-based subsidies, so nobody pays more than 30% of their adjusted income. The maximum income for folks in the Voucher Program and in the Affordable Housing Program is 50% of median income. There's a chart in a minute that shows what that income level means. And 75% of the folks that come into our housing have to be at the 30% of median level or less. Out of all of our tenants, about 84% fall in that 30% of median or less income level. This is just a chart to remind people, because I get asked all the time and I don't have it memorized. Well, what does that mean? What is 30% of AMI? What is median? The most important thing to remember is that this chart, which is used for all kinds of federal programs, is based on a federal calculation of area median income, which includes the entire Washtenaw County. The number circled in green, 92,900, is the median income for Washtenaw County, and everything else in this chart is a formula. It's a formula. That's the thing to remember. And then in red, I just indicated what programs in the city, county, federal, local, that are capped by that income level. As a comparison, the state of Michigan median income is $67,300. So there's a big difference in Washtenaw County compared to not just the rest of Michigan, but actually the rest of the United States on our incomes. And when you translate that into what's affordable housing, and that can be rental or home ownership, this just gives you a chart by household size. It doesn't translate directly into number of bedrooms. Typically, you can have up to 2 people per bedroom. So if that helps you kind of figure out where that is on bedroom size. Just one thing to point out is the federal minimum wage is $7.25 an hour. Michigan's minimum wage is $9.45 an hour. If somebody worked in either of those minimum wage levels full-time, assuming they didn't have a single day off, and they probably don't get paid overtime as well, they would be pretty close, just around the 30% AMI income level. For $9.45 an hour, that's $19,656 a year. That's not the case if you're in another community in Michigan. You might be in the 50% AMI level just because the median income is higher in so many other communities. But in our community, you're pretty much in that 30% AMI level. This is a map showing where our housing is that we own. We are also updating a map that shows all kinds of different housing that has some kind of subsidy, whether it's through zoning, whether it's the co-ops, to kind of show the distribution both in the city of Ann Arbor as well as the county, but I do not have that updated with me tonight. And this is a chart just giving you an idea of, again, of where our folks that we serve, where their income level tends to be compared to the rest of the county. So the big impact on our budget, one of the big impacts, aside from HUD, which I'll get into, is development. So as we've been converting our public housing to this new housing model, we are at the point where we're at mostly at demolition. So when we demolish apartments, we have to relocate folks. We don't have rent coming in. We're out getting money to redevelop them, and we still have to pay our staff. So it does impact us during that development process. And so that's one thing to take into consideration when we talk about our budget. And this gives you an idea of what we can do through our redevelopment. We added 58 apartments total because we were able to increase density on our sites. We were able to add energy efficiency. We were able to add many more accessible and visitable apartments, especially for family sites, because all of our family sites had stepped entries with steps inside. We were able to capitalize our reserves. What that means is, under public housing, if we needed operating reserves or capital reserves to replace a roof or a furnace, we had to ask HUD for those funds. And all of our new funding sources have required us to put those funds aside up front. And so we have about $1.2 million in reserves that are dedicated to specific housing projects. This chart actually shows where the sources of funding come from when you do redevelopment of the type of housing that we do. And you can see by far the largest source of fund is low-income housing tax credits. I won't go into detail about that unless you have questions, but it's just to show that when we talk about leveraging funding to do development of affordable housing, this is the type of funds that you can leverage. There's I don't remember which one it is, like the third or fourth one on there is the City of Ann Arbor's Affordable Housing Fund compared to some of those other sources. And so what I want to talk about is the budget, the larger administrative budget, before I go into the details of the Housing Commission's budget. In the administrator's budget, there was $660,000 a year to be dedicated toward the Affordable Housing Fund. That is a fund that we, as well as others, Avalon, Community Housing Alternatives, MAP, and others, have access to do new development. And if you take that and you project it by 8 years, just to match what the millage funds are, but it could be longer, it could be shorter, and you factor in inflation, that's a little over $5.6 million for the Affordable Housing Fund. And so if you leverage that as $25 for every dollar of local funding, we're talking about $141 million in funds. And so people always ask me, well, how many apartments does that buy you? Well, it depends. If you acquire and rehab something that's much less expensive than building something new, is it in the downtown? Is it outside the downtown? Is it 1 bedroom? Is it 5 bedrooms? So I put a range in there of about 500 to 700 new additional apartments just from that one source of funding based on the leveraging. Because you do not have to provide 100% of the funding to build one apartment for affordable housing. Within that, we know that Avalon will be requesting funding for Hickory Way, which is 70 apartments. I believe they're going to be requesting 660 for both Hickory Way and Gott Street, was that the other one? And a couple of units on Gott Street. The rest are to be determined as we look at other locations. The other piece of the administrator's budget was inclusive of $220,000 a year for supportive services. What happened about a year ago is the Housing Commission asked all of our nonprofits that we work with, let us know your total budget, what we're providing, where your gaps are, what would you do if you had additional funding, how would you use it, how's your funding looking in the future. And so when we did that, they came back with about $520,000 a year in need, which included the money the Housing Commission was already passing through, part of it from the city, part of it from our own budget. And so these are the nonprofits that we work with, and I was remiss and forgot to put Ozone House in there. We don't currently contract with Ozone House, but we do partner with them where they have HUD funds, and we provide the housing and they provide the services. And what I would like to do is ask Aubrey to come up here and talk about the types of services that a nonprofit does provide and their purpose. We have, I'm not going to bring every single one of our nonprofits, but she can give you an idea of why it's important to have these services.
Thank you, Jennifer. Good evening, everybody. So I am going to provide an overview of supportive housing services, and as Jennifer noted, we don't all provide the same sort of purview of services, but we are really good and skilled about not being duplicitous in the services that we offer, and we have a very collaborative infrastructure so that we're partnered in a way that really optimizes resources amongst all of us. So the essential characteristics of supportive housing are, number one, permanence and affordability. So the housing is permanently affordable, and it's intended to be that way. and people don't have to sort of time out or transition out of permanent supportive housing. That means that we very specifically target those who are utilizing that resource who absolutely need it the most in our community. Services are housing oriented, so our aim is to help residents stay housed, and it's really that basic. But we, as providers, help people find suitable housing, build relationships with property management and landlords, help them understand their rights and responsibilities as tenants, and intervene to prevent eviction. Services are multidisciplinary, so that means that we have people who are specialized with substance use, mental health, physical health. We have a partnership with Packard Health, and they're providing primary care to people in their units. And that really multidisciplinary approach is critical to the success of our model. Services are voluntary but assertive, so tenants won't lose housing simply because they're not participating in them, but we offer them assertively and do so in a very outreach-oriented way. It's critical that people feel really integrated into the community, that their neighbors feel that sense of integration, and that they're living independently in apartments with a normal tenant-landlord lease. And there's an emphasis on choice, so really wanting to maximize client choice, both in housing options and the services that are being offered. And then a really critical component is the low barrier to entry, so treating housing as a basic human right, not a reward for clinical success. So we don't have blanket bans on criminal background or credit, those sorts of things that are really going to get them screened out of the private landlord market. The bucket of what we offer could be categorized into sort of three different things. So pre-tenancy services, so outreach to the population, assessing need, identifying resources, and then ensuring that they are able to move in, that they have what they need to do so. Identifying any behavioral issues at the onset of move-in that might compromise housing, and creating an assessment and a plan around that. Housing stabilization and tenancy sustaining, so early identification and intervention of behaviors, education on what it means to be a tenant and how to do that skillfully, eviction prevention, coaching, assistance with conflict resolution, that sort of thing, recertification, paperwork, access to entitlements, et cetera. And their care coordination, so housing-focused care coordination, that might look like hospital and jail discharge planning, being a liaison with care providers, community integration to information and referral, transportation to medical appointments, we're on call 24/7, 365, et cetera. So what is the impact of all of this? And you know, we talk a lot about wanting to end the institutional circuit of homelessness and crisis services. So for a lot of folks, that means homelessness, jail, hospital, or other crisis services. And we know, and evidence has showed time and again, that supportive housing impacts that institutional circuit and disrupts it. So we're always going to look at housing retention rate, which for us is 93% of the people that we serve stay housed. But we're also going to look at how we're improving people's quality of life and how we're disrupting that institutional circuit. So one of the things that we know is that people who just have case management alone, but not in the context of a supportive housing model, don't succeed as much as the population of folks who have the combination of both. Ironically, Avalon serves 80% of the people that we serve have a diagnosed mental health disorder or substance use disorder. Only 10% roughly of them are open to community mental health services. So there's a pretty big gap there that we're trying to fill. We know that we are impacting the criminal justice system, so people with disabilities who live in supportive housing after release from jail or prison are 61% less likely to be reincarcerated 1 year later than those who are not. In contract with the City of Ann Arbor, we are the case management provider to our mental health court. Participants in our mental health court do not serve jail time and work with us within the context of a supportive housing model to stay out of jail and to resolve underlying mental health issues. We were part of a large national demonstration where we targeted through data matching high utilizers of emergency health systems who were homeless and had chronic health conditions. And among those, not only did 90% stay housed, but we saw a 54% reduction in participants identifying the emergency room as their usual source of care. And we saw cost savings to the tune of $6,000 per person per year amongst the highest utilizers of emergency services. We also know that we keep people out of long-term institutions like psychiatric institutions, nursing homes, et cetera. So those are some of the sort of overarching impacts in terms of breaking that institutional circuit and then its connection to mental health and our criminal justice system.
I'm not a social worker, contrary to popular belief. My background is in political science, and I would like to say business. But I know that it is critical to have these relationships with our nonprofit service providers to keep the folks that we serve housed, without a doubt. And we cannot continue to provide the type of housing that we provide without these partnerships. So I'm very thankful that there was a conversation in the community about mental health services, which we definitely see as part of our entire range of supportive services that we provide. And so I hope that this part of the administrator's budget does get adopted, because it is very critical for the work that we're doing. This is just an abbreviated version of what you've already seen in the administrator's budget about where the funding is from. And the indicators that we are going to track, if this is approved, are 4 different indicators. And each nonprofit has multiple funding sources that determine how they do their work, and all of their funders have different outcomes that they look for. And so we looked for ones that all of our funders could track similarly. And then since we've never had to compile them together, I just took the lowest common denominator. So somebody might have housing retention of 95%, but the lowest one was 85%. So that's how those numbers were chosen. And so housing retention is always number 1, making sure people stay housed, and then increasing income, as well as demonstrating that they're participating in a client-centered services, and that they're reaching some of the goals that they've determined that with their case management. I'm going to switch gears and talk about our voucher program, because the voucher program is our single biggest program. It is the largest number of folks that we serve. SOS is actually our service provider for that program. If people tend to have more likely to have a job and be more likely to have kids in a family. And they tend to be living not in the city of Ann Arbor due to the high cost of living. This is just a map showing pretty much every year the map looks like this as to where people are housed. We have over 1,600 people that we serve, which translates into over 3,000 individuals throughout the county. The single largest impact on our budget that relates to the city's budget is that we are paid to administer the voucher program with what's called administrative fees. The last time we were fully funded by HUD based on what HUD determines it would cost us to run the program, and then actually getting enough money from Congress to fully fund the program was back in 2003. As you can see, this year we're projected to be at what they call 80% pro rata. So 80% of what HUD thinks it will cost us to run our program is how much Congress actually allocated. If we were fully funded, that would be equivalent of about $250,000 more a year that would provide support for our operations. I'm going to turn to, before we get to this last item, I'm going to turn to our budget and try to explain it as to what impacts which items. So if you pull up your document that has the Housing Commission budget, on the left, we have programs, cost centers that are really about the Ann Arbor Housing Commission as a federally funded entity. So central office is administration. That's also where our family self-sufficiency program is run out of, so that's myself and our finance staff. The voucher program, as you can see, with $14 million budget, is by far the largest budget. The vast majority of funding is passed through directly to landlords. That's the line item called rent subsidies or housing assistance payment, HAP. And then the continuum of care program is a program specifically that we partner with Avalon to house chronically homeless households that are in the FUSE program that Aubrey mentioned. And so everything on the left is impacted by our HUD funding, And you can see in the city general fund line items for central office, I had $460,000. That was all of that, except for 60 of it would be passed through to our nonprofits that we work with. And then within the voucher program, there's $220,000. 160 is a recurring general fund support that the city provides, and the extra 60 will be just for half of fiscal year '20. And we need additional operating support within the voucher program. And CAN and Avalon will not be up and running until probably January, February in our new project. And so they do not need to be funded for about a half a year because we won't actually have anywhere for them to work, and we will not have any tenants for them to work with at our Swift Lane site. If you look across to the affiliated entities, these are all separate business entities. We have AHD as a nonprofit. That is the partner that works with us, our own nonprofit that we use to do our development. And then each of those other entities, Colonial Oaks, Maple Tower, et cetera, are the new legal entities for all of our housing that we own and operate. And so when you look at each of those are self-sufficient within each other. Our rents covers our expenses because we are required to by all of our new funders. And what happens is we actually pay a management fee from those entities to our central office that helps pay for the cost of running our operations. And we also have rent subsidies coming from our voucher programs that go to those legal entities to help pay for rent. So there's a lot of cross-movement of finances, but the bottom line is when you get to the end of the year with these tax credit entities and they have a certain amount of cash flow, we cannot spend that cash until after we've been audited. And we have to maintain a 1.15 debt coverage ratio. We end the fiscal year, and then we are audited, and then if there's any cash available, we can send that to our nonprofit, and then we can use that money in our nonprofit to help subsidize operations. So previously, up until the fiscal year '20, almost all of those funds went right to our nonprofit service providers. And so we have basically decided it was important to keep our nonprofits working with us more so than hiring extra staff. But we really do need to figure out a long-term way to keep our voucher program funded. And so what I really want to do is take those future funds that are available from our tax credit projects through our cash flow and use them to cover the future gaps that we're going to continue to see in our voucher program and in our central office. And so if you look at the comparison to the fiscal year '21 budget, really the only difference is Swift Lane will be operational, whereas this year it's under development, under construction. And so there's more revenue coming in and more expenses in Swift Lane. And then there's a shift in central office. The full $520,000 that I mentioned before for support services will go through our central office directly to our nonprofits. And that leaves $160,000 in city general funds. That's our recurring general fund operations that we've been getting for many years. And this is my last slide, but I thought I would stop before we get to this next section and see if there are questions about the budget part of this before we talk about future policy and planning initiatives.
Thank you. I'm not sure this is a proper budget question, but when you talk about a retention rate, 93% retention rate, is that inside and outside the system that you're providing for these folks? So that some people are still with us and some have moved on, but they're considered housed?
Yes, so when we track housing retention, first of all, we look at that 1 year at a time, and it fluctuates typically 1 to 2%, so we really hover at that. And we do, so that means that, yes, people have stayed housed, so a positive move-on would be included in that. But something like eviction or incarceration, something like that would be looked at as a negative exit and not included in that retention rate.
So I know there's a lot of excitement on the street because you guys are getting ready to open up your wait list.
There's a
So-
lot of excitement.
Somebody asked me today to ask this. It is, do you know what the ratio is between folks, like what their home county is, Washtenaw versus Wayne County, applying for these openings?
I did not look before I came here, but in 2012, when we opened up our wait list, we didn't have any what's called a preference. So you can have a preference for Washtenaw County. So we didn't have any preferences, and we had 15,000 applications, about 4,500 were Washtenaw County. When we opened up our wait list in 2018 or 17, we had a preference for Washtenaw County, and so people self-selected themselves out. And I think it was about 80% were Washtenaw County. We had, again, about 4,200, 4,300 applications. When we open up our wait list as a federal program, it gets published to the entire United States, and you can apply anywhere in the United States to as many programs as you want. And so if you don't have a local preference, then you will get a lot of folks from all over the United States apply.
Thank you.
Please continue.
Okay.
Can I just,
Oh, Councilman Graham.
and we do have a local preference again this time?
Yes, we
with the
do.
new wait list.
Yes, we do. We have three preferences. We have, you either live or work in Washtenaw County, you have a disability, or you are homeless. So those are our three preferences. The other preferences we could select are that you have a job, which we don't. We don't require you to have a job. Probably about between 46 and 50% of our tenants have a disability. Most everybody else has some kind of income from a job. The next thing I wanted to talk about was policy and planning initiatives. I'm going to ask Teresa to join me up here to talk about that. Teresa's been working with Derek Delacour, Brett Leonard, Susan Paulet, and a couple folks from the AATA on doing a community engagement process with the Y lot. It will be coming back to City Council hopefully in May. We're working with the City Attorney's Office. We issued an RFP. We interviewed various consultants, and the sole purpose was to really engage the community about what they would like to see on that site, both in terms of types of uses, how and what the massing or density of that project might look like. And we very specifically wanted to engage people in non-traditional ways. And so that was a part of our criteria, was how to reach out to folks and, not just have a day-long, thing that you're writing on a piece of paper about, for example. Do you want anything about that? Okay. The next thing is assessment of city-owned properties. I believe it was about a month ago that was directed to staff. Again, working with the same group of people pretty much. Teresa's office is taking the lead on many of the items. These are the things that I had these questions last time, and I didn't have hadn't researched it to the point where I was ready to give you the information, but now we know where we're headed. So the things that we're going to be looking at are federal environmental review, which the Office of Community Economic Development is conducting. Looking at zoning, ownership current. So for example, South Industrial is not owned by the general fund part of the city. It is owned by the Public Works part of the city. The fire house number 2 is owned by that business entity that includes the fire stations. And so looking at what entity of the city currently owns them, and then looking at future ownership structures, how could that look? And so we'd like to talk to the attorney's office as well as our attorney on some of those ideas, looking at what public utilities are available, what's the infrastructure, is it a site that already has large-sized water and sewer infrastructure, that kind of thing. The other thing we're going to be looking at is various ways you could do financing of some kind of mixed-income, mixed-use projects. Are they brownfield eligible? Looking at property values, potential taxes, and other planned uses of the site, so looking at other plans in the city to see if, for example, in some part of the city, there is a plan for the tree line trail, for example. So we want to make sure we capture all of those things. And then we'll do a final analysis to talk about, does it make sense to do, is this a site that you could use sort of the traditional financing mechanisms that we've used to redevelop housing? Or is it a site that you'd have to use some other alternative mechanisms? Is it a site that you could include mixed income through zoning? Or is it a site that really isn't the best place for affordable housing? Maybe it's a site, it would be better to sell and then use the proceeds at another site. One of the big things that we want to talk about is how would you, if you really did add hundreds of units of affordable housing, how would you manage a wait list? So the Housing Commission manages our own wait list for our rent subsidies, but if you have private, if these weren't owned, I'm assuming they're not going to all be owned by the Housing Commission or Avalon, there's probably some private developers who will own some of these apartments. People don't know that they exist. They don't know how to get on a wait list. They don't know who they talk to. And so one thing we'd like to talk about is how would you have a centralized location for people to access that information? Is there anything you want to add about that? We haven't, go ahead.
The city has actually been able to get some affordable units through different tools like air rights at the city apartments. And while they are obligated to keep them affordable, and we actually do the review of all the incomes of folks that are living in those units, we have no idea how they're marketing them or presenting them to the public. So it could be very easy that you tell your friends and family, and we want to make sure that anything that comes on board, and the first ones that will come on will probably be 1140 Broadway that come on through a low-income housing tax credit or public funds, and that there is going to be a process in place so that we can have marketing and a wait list set up in a way that anybody can be a part of it.
And we welcome your suggestions on how you'd like to see that look, because it has not been, we haven't put the details together. We just know it's something that needs to be worked on. I'm going to let Teresa cover number 3 and number 4 and number 6. I think that's everything.
Sure.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So the Office of Community and Economic Development does staff the Housing and Human Services Advisory Board, and every year we put together a work plan on different initiatives, and this year it's Councilwoman Bannister and Councilman Ackerman who is on our HHSAB as the council liaisons. The first thing that's going to be coming to you through that body is going to be a recommended change to the fee in lieu of affordable housing. There are several parts of the zoning ordinance through the plan unit development and also the A2D2 zoning bonuses that do say if there's a provision for affordable housing, you can also do a fee in lieu of affordable housing. That hasn't been updated, the process for that, since 2007. And there is an annual amount that we have in case there are projects that take that fee in lieu. So that was approved by HHSAB at their last meeting, and so we'll be presenting that. And it's a nice, complicated formula, so I can't wait to try and explain it to you all, probably in the first meeting in June. They're also going to be looking at some potential zoning changes in coordination with the Planning Commission. In the Plan Unit Development Ordinance, there is a provision to provide affordable housing at 80% of the area median income. So that's one discussion. Do we leave it at 80? Do we go back to 60% or go to 60%, which is the goal from the 2015 study that was adopted by City Council? But also there's a provision related to rent in there that is very loose. It just says 30% of someone's income. We'd like to tie that to the area median income so they match up. Probably using Mr. rents, nice little weedy things to think about. So we'll be looking at that and making a recommendation to Planning Commission and then probably jointly bringing that here. We'll also be working with the Planning Commission as they revisit those downtown premiums. I know that was something that was part of one of the council resolutions recently passed around revisiting some of the policy tools for affordable housing. We're also excited the HHSAB will be administering the Affordable Housing Fund. So pending all the budget approvals, we'll be looking to our partners to start accepting some of those applications for that so that those can be ready to come back to you probably in July as soon as we can, because we know that there is a wait list of projects. And Aubrey wanted me to let you know that it wasn't Gott Street, it was 2 properties on Glendale that would be part of that. So just to correct that for the record. Next up is the Brownfield Policy, and so they're Councilmember Smith and Eaton and Griswold are all sitting on the Brownfield Review Committee. So recently, we were able to. And Hayner, I'm so sorry. That's terrible. I didn't turn all the way. That was the problem. So we recently had been working with the city finance team, with the Derek Delacourt, Brett Leonard, also Jennifer, and the city attorney to review, actually to develop a brownfield policy. Whenever you're dealing with TIF financing, as you know, there's a lot of questions about what's the most appropriate use for tax increment financing, especially around the environmental and the non-environmental piece. The non-environmental piece is supposed to have a community benefit, and so we are looking in that policy to focus that community benefit on either community infrastructure or affordable housing, or both. And so that recommendation is passed through the Brownfield Review Committee and will be coming to you all. I don't know if it's going to be in late May or early June. So we're looking forward to that discussion as well. And other county initiatives. So the 2015 Housing Affordability Study that was adopted by the City of Ann Arbor and the DDA, as well as the county, Pittsfield Township, Ypsi Township, and the City of Ypsi. We have a large affordable housing leadership team that meets bi-monthly. This year we expanded it because in the county, we're seeing lots of pressure everywhere. So for example, Chelsea and Dexter, Saline and Superior Township have all joined that committee. And so we're working with that broader group on strategies, whether it's policy, zoning changes, whatever fits the community, and everyone's a little bit different, to try and encourage new affordable, and more importantly right now, I think, well, not more importantly, but equally important is preservation of affordable units. In the last 2 years, we've lost more than 800 affordable units throughout the county. More than 200 of them have been for senior. And so there was a question earlier about Courthouse Square. Courthouse Square technically is still in an affordability period, but they're an old enough tax credit property that they could choose to do the qualified contract, which is how we lost those more than 800 units. So far, they are still in affordability period and seem to want to continue in that way. We do know that they would like some assistance, I believe last time we checked, on some of their 2-bedroom units, or is it that they're looking to make sure that they can not have any vacancies with their larger units. They don't have as much of an issue with the 1-bedrooms. They do not have parking, and so it has to be the right fit for some seniors that use that property. So that's a way that we're trying to stay in touch with them. But preservation, as well as adding the new units, has been some of our focus throughout the county. We're really excited that some of Ann Arbor's neighbors are really engaged, especially Pittsfield and Scioto Township, and so we've been working with them as well. I think that's good for now.
All right, great. All right, you want to stay up here?
Sure.
We are done. If you have questions.
We do have tend to have an 8:45 cutoff. Are there folks on council who haven't previously asked questions tonight who have questions of our good friends of the Housing Commission? I seem to recollect you previously asking.
I don't fit the description, but no,
I do have, who has, mindful of our time, who has questions? Just 1, 2. Let's roll with your 2, and then perhaps we'll call it a day. Thank you.
just
Councilor
briefly,
Rayner.
you mentioned accounting for what's lost, like the 800 units, the senior units and so on. Does it fall to your office, or perhaps Mr. Lazarus could answer, or does the city have an accounting of what is lost generally? So like if we have a property comes in and so we have one coming forward, I just saw the plans down there, they're gonna tear down 4 houses behind the Michigan Theater and put this thing up there. So do we account for how many bedrooms were in those 4 houses that are gonna be torn down, and what the price point was of those and so on? So we have sort of a balance of what's going up, what's coming down, and the overall picture of the health of the affordability health of our city? Where would something like that lie?
We do not track it. Community development does not track it. We only track it if something's been designated as affordable, if they have some kind of restriction to it. Otherwise, we don't track market rate. I don't know if planning does anything like that. I wouldn't think so.
It seems like that would be a nice lens on our issues here in the city. And I guess the other part of that is, second part of that is, if there is private development that is considered affordable, outside of your project, like I've had people approach me about, can we loosen up zoning to allow tiny houses and different, various different projects, and also micro unit construction through private development and things like that. I mean, that's all well and good. Is that accounted for in somehow, like you're interested in that, knowing about that, even if you don't, like your list wouldn't necessarily serve those potential users of those units, or, I don't know if that's a real question, but,
I'll try.
okay.
So one thing we do is we try and track the market overall, so we're seeing what the trend line is for prices and rents by unit size, to some of your questions. Recently, we were in a conversation with the Y-Lot consultants, and we asked the question, what is a micro unit? Because everyone's definition is a little bit less. The way that it's been looked at nationally, it's somewhere between, it's about 450 and 550 square feet. So there's the new properties on South Main that we went up in the last few years. Some of those studios would be considered micro units, and I would not consider those affordable, how they're priced currently. So we try to watch generally, we do not track individual units. And the reason why we focus more on what we call committed affordable units is because they have both income and rent restrictions on them, so they aren't subject to the market fluctuations. So in a downturn, we might see more affordable rents, and we probably did about 8, 10 years ago, that we would all probably consider generally more affordable. But right now, as they swing up, even some of those smaller units or older units, or however you want to classify it, probably wouldn't fit as much. Now, there are some exceptions. I would say a lot of the university co-ops and other cooperative housing tends to be affordable for people. We're having a little bit of a conversation about how should we be thinking again about SROs or single-room occupancies for that same question, like different types of housing product hitting different price points, but we don't track them, I think, in the detail that you're talking about.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Bannister.
Over the weekend, I received an inquiry about the list of 10 city-owned properties with the industrial in North Main and all. Was there a reason that we didn't include the Bryant Senior Center in that list? Because that was what some residents suggested, that could be renovated and added on to.
Are you talking about probably Burns Park Senior Center? There's the Bryant Community Center that Community Action Network works out of, and then there's the one in Burns Park that has the senior center.
I think it's the
Either
Burns Park
way, I would be reluctant to look at taking away a service spot unless council directed us to be honest. Like, it would have never occurred to me, but if that was something that, I don't know how large the parcels of land are, but if council directed us to look at those sites as a sort of mixed use with housing and services, I think that would make sense.
I think that's what the residents I was talking about, and just also, by the way, we have an Ann Arbor Community Center over in Ward 1 that
north
turned
side,
out
yeah.
to not be, has changed.
Yes. If that is something that council wants us to look at, we can add it to the list, absolutely. If that's what you guys would like us to look at, we could look at all the different community centers. I think it would be dependent on how large of a site they are as to whether it makes sense to do a demo in some kind of mixed use.
Well, and if I was the user, I'd probably rather live there than on South Industrial.
Right.
And while it's fresh on your mind, is anything new, updates on those units at 1140 Broadway? Are those were, anything new or just the same old figures on that?
Same.
Okay, thanks.
All right.
Oh, well, Mr. Hayner wasn't on council at that time.
Well, I
I think there's 10 or something.
That's another case where the square footage, the per square footage price might make them seem not so quite affordable. Is that accurate?
There was, I'm sorry, I think it's 12 units, and I might be wrong, you can correct me if I'm wrong, that we're locked in at a certain AMI, at 60% AMI. The rest of them will fluctuate with the market and will probably be nicely priced.
Yeah.
And just to be clear, if a market rate unit seems to be affordable, let's say it's $800 or something like that, and there's no restriction on who can move in there, somebody making $100,000 can move in there, and so we just do not count that other than it's available in the marketplace. One thing that we do know is where vouchers are used at, and we know when a landlord tells us we will no longer accept vouchers, that we do know.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We now come to public comment general time. Public comment general time is an opportunity for members of the public to speak to council and the community about matters of municipal interest. To speak at public comment general time, one need not have signed up in advance. Speakers will have 3 minutes in which to speak, so please pay close attention to the time clock. As a matter of courtesy, we may have only one person speaking at a time, and if you require assistance in speaking before council, we'd be delighted to provide it to you. Is there anyone who'd like to speak at public comment? Please come right on up.
Hello, my name is Amy Ciccarelli, and I would like to speak about the renovations to downtown and the things that the Dda talked about, the trees. Pine trees are more hardy in the northern climate and are easier to maintain. You can put larger trees in, and they would probably be more likely to thrive. They would be cheaper and more practical in the smaller space. As far as the parking garages, why not, if they're going to be solarized, why not also have them be wind capacity as well? I don't think $22 million for a garage is a sound financial thing. You can use a lot of recycled materials, and recycling and green energy combined are the way to go. That's the way of the future, because pollution control includes recycling. And I would like to propose, as Chris Taylor and I have talked about, a carbon emissions vacuum made from recycled food containers. And hospitals and restaurants are one of the largest, I guess you could say, polluters of these things, because they have a lot of food containers that get tossed away. And if we just separate them, put our food into a compost, and then also the pedestrian areas that are being refurbished, we can make power from our own pedestrian walkways, people power, and make renewable energy, clean energy from people power. And so those are my commentary. And I keep it under 3 minutes so that other people can talk.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Please.
Hi, my name is Jin-Gu Lee. I hope you received my email forwarded by Councilor Kathy Griswold. I would like to talk about Huron High School new traffic flow policy. Huron High School has 2 entrances, one from Huron Parkway and the other one from Fuller Road. And about 60% of Huron High School population, I just glanced at the map area, the school zone. So like Fuller Road and Geddes Road, and north of that, about 60%, I think. And so when the current school year started, AAPS blocked personal vehicles from using Huron Parkway entrance from 7 a.m. to 4 p.m. Remember, 7 a.m. to 4 p.m. School ends 2:36. This now, hundreds of more vehicles are routed through the intersection between Huron Parkway and Geddes Fuller Road. So there's a traffic jam at the intersection. It was already crowded, but now it's like 10 or 15 minutes. People are just sitting there. I know Ann Arbor City has their no idling ordinance, and we should fine them $800. I think it's $100 fine now. We should fine them. So people are wasting tens of minutes, precious morning commute time. You know how precious, 7:30, 7 o'clock in the morning, you drop and wake them up and then, drive to the work, things like that. And then pollute the air. So, and also the pedestrians from the other side of the Fuller Road coming, at Gallup Park and then going to the Huron High School, they have to cross the Fuller Road. Now 100 more vehicles, drive this Fuller Road, and the speed limit is 25. But when I see them, I don't think the vehicles drive more than 10 miles because of the vehicles are backed up. Even if there is a pedestrian, traffic stops. So I suggested, why are we routing 100 vehicles instead of 17 school buses? 17 school buses. And AAP said, well, the floor road loop is cannot handle long enough, not long enough to handle 17 buses. So I measured with the Google map. So the Huron Parkway loop is 930 or 25 feet, something like that. And the Fuller Road loop is 736, something like that. So the other one is 17 buses, 4 p.m. I guess I'm done. Anyway, yeah, that was my comment. We should route the buses, not the school, the personal vehicles.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak at public comment? Seeing no one, public comment is closed. May I have a motion to adjourn, please? Moved by Councilmember Eaton, second by Councilmember Rumlawi. Discussion. All in favor? All opposed? We are adjourned.